So many of you, particularly those who are building SaaS businesses, would know about SaaSBOOMi and would know about Tarun. So Tarun reached out to me on Saturday morning at 7 o'clock saying, Dheeraj is in town and he has some time. So would you like to do a chat with him, right? And so Dhiraj incidentally has some kind of roots in Hyderabad. His better half is from Hyderabad, and like most good things Hyderabadi, he's has, I think, a particular affinity for Hyderabad. He tells me that he's been coming here for the last 25 years. Yeah. So we'll adopt him. We'll give him the keys to the city, if you will, right, at Hyderabad. Okay, so let's just so I'll tell you how we're planning to do this. The format, try and keep it light and conversational. The first 40 minutes, I have a whole lot of questions, and which I'll run with Dhiraj. And I think the whole idea is that Dhiraj can share with you his learnings, his experiences, his perspectives. Obviously, anyone who's built a company of the scale which he has would have gone through crests and troughs, and we'll talk through some of that. And hopefully, one question which I will, of course, ask him is, Dhiraj, please share with the audience what will it take for any of the SaaS companies here. Maybe all of you can do a quick show of hands for all the guys who are in the SaaS space. Yeah. So a lot of them. So I think all of you would like to be on this side. Hopefully, with the insights which Dhiraj shares with you, you'll get some ideas on what it'll take to be on this side. Yeah. And then we'll throw it open for kind of ask me anything type of thing, right? Okay, so I'm going to just start with a quick.
Maybe just to begin with, remember we talked about. So I was supposed to fly out of Delhi today, and my flight got cancelled, and apparently it's probably because of Russia and Ukraine. So this thing is closer to home than we think. I just suggested that we start with a moment of silence. I know that we are taking a neutral stance as governments, but as people, as humanists, we don't have to take a neutral stance. We have to at least, share with the pain, that real pain that's going on in Ukraine. So let's take a moment of silence just to remember and silently contemplate what's happening in Ukraine. Okay, thanks.
You should stand up.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. MSR, I also wanted to say that I've started to get closer to Ukraine personally. Just obviously, we have some folks out of Ukraine working at DevRev, but also in the last couple of months, I started interacting with an artist on Etsy. Etsy is this platform where you can get artwork or many of those things from anybody. And in many ways, she was so good at customer service. Her art, it's still stuck in New York somewhere, in customs, maybe because it's Ukraine. And this last week or 10 days, I've been just, asking her how things are and stuff like that. But the thing is, we're all helpless. We can't do much about it. And yesterday I reached out and realized that she's actually taken her entire family out of Ukraine to Romania, and her husband is actually fighting the cause. I'm like, wow, this thing is harder than we thought, So we should all observe what's going on in the world and see if there's anything we can do to help improve the situation. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, Ukraine is in all your phones. I don't know if you guys realize it. The founder of WhatsApp is a Ukrainian. Yeah. Pretty sure it's there in
and many of you, I was talking to one of my ex-colleagues, and his niece had to walk like 20 miles on foot to get to the Polish border, and then was in a bunker for 2 days. She was studying medicine at Ukraine. So this thing is closer to home than we think, So thank you, folks, for observing a moment of silence.
Okay, folks, for those of you who don't know Neeraj, I will try.
Dhiraj.
Dheeraj, sorry. My apologies. Yeah. So this is what COVID does to you, lapses of memory. Yeah. Dheeraj is a storied entrepreneur. Has like part of the typical IIT IIM mafia, if you will. Went to IIT Kanpur, then went on to try and do a Ph.D. I think at UT Austin, but I think then stopped at an MS. And then after that, did I think 10 years of working for others, Trilogy, Oracle, Zimble, and Aster, and then set up in Nutanix in 2009, right? And I will leave him to talk about Nutanix in detail, but just quickly, Nutanix is now a $1.3 billion company.
1.3 billion in
revenue, and listed, went public in 2016. Dheeraj raised $316 million of funding, according to Wiki.
We raised about 2 billion.
2 billion, okay. Wiki says 316, okay. So, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. I'm going to speak a little in the microphone going forward, yeah?
Sure. So apart from, being now a serial entrepreneur, we'll get Dheeraj to also talk about his new company, DevRev. He's also deeply interested in philanthropy, and we'll get to explore that side of it as well as we go on, right? So thank you for being here. Really appreciate taking the time out, despite, I guess you came here to spend time with family, but thank you for being here. And I think that's one thing you'll see with a lot of entrepreneurs from the Valley, right? Anything where they believe they can come back and give back and, share their learnings, their insights. So thank you.
Yeah. My pleasure.
So let's start with Dheeraj, after working for 10 years, right? And I guess living the comfortable American life, Gargadi, all of those things. What drove you to, first of all, identify a space in which you could build a company in the cloud infrastructure space? And what caused you, first of all, to set up Nutanix? What problems did you see? What basically what was the inspiration leading to the building of Nutanix?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I had to not go through the grind of a permanent residency and all the things that people who end up in the US end up doing, I probably would have started at 25 or 24, whatever, a new company. But I did at 34 instead, there was always an itch to, be more autonomous, and I had a strong gut and I wanted to really use the gut. But I think it was great to learn over those 10 years as to how do you ship software. And I mean, my first startup was Trilogy, was a bigger company by this time, but great learnings. This is 99, 2000 timeframe of how not to splurge money too much. That company was doing really well, and yet it was spending a lot of money as well. And they had bespoke deployment. So, you had to go customize the software at every large customer. And my second startup was the year 2000, 2003. Basically went through a bust, for those of you who probably remember the big bust that happened in the year 2000. And again, great learnings about some really good talent that we had come to accumulate in the company.
This was in Zimbabwe.
Zambil, building a clustered file server, distributed systems, commodity hardware, using Linux, and using commodity switches. We're building our own switch as well back in the day. A gigabit Ethernet was still not commodity back in the day. But learned a lot about how not to build a top-down company, because that company was fairly top-heavy, and even though we had come to hire very good talent, there were some great investors. Vinod was there, and NEA and others. But this is also time when I got married in the year 2000. So it's like, you went through your sort of these years when you're really trying to build partnership with your wife, and then these 3 years of uncertainty as a startup. And the fact that it took a while for things to come back up in 2003. Learned a lot at Oracle as well. 4.5 years, Oracle database, hardcore database, Oracle RAC, clusters, distributed systems, how to ship software. So great learnings, but 2007 through 9, I'm like, itching to come back to a small company. I joined Astrodata, which was really back in the day, the snowflake of its time. There was no cloud, but they were using distributed systems, commodity hardware, and building a large-scale data warehouse to compete against Teradata, and Oracle was still not as strong with data warehousing back in the day. So there was a pattern to my overall sort of life. It was distributed systems, clusters, distributed systems, distributed databases, distributed data warehouses. And at Aster, I knew two of the folks from before, because one of them had worked with me at Zambil. The other one was my best friend from IIT Kanpur, Ajit, and we were just impatient to go do something. And as we saw a few things in the horizon, because in 2008, the global financial crisis had come about. So both my startups were done during the time when, and these were not my startups, I was an employee there. Both of these startups, I learned a lot to just, what does it mean to hunker down and build while the economy and the macro takes care of itself, which it does. It takes like 9, 12, 18 months, but things take care of themselves. So in 2009, when we thought that things will look up from here, because there was this pent up demand, and people hold on to the purse strings, they don't spend. But we knew that if you build a product in the next 2 years, the purse strings will open up. The pent up demand will cause people to come and try out new things and tinker with new products. So in 2009 September, we started Nutanix, and again, the real goal was to discover ourselves, to explore whether our gut is good enough or not, and learn in every which way. So that's Nutanix.
But what, specifically in terms of identifying the problem you were trying to solve?
Yeah. So passion for distributed systems. We knew we had to make money with the bird in hand. The bird in hand was our strength in using commodity hardware, never thinking about a big box approach, but always thinking about scale out architectures. And data was a big passion for us. And we started looking deeper into virtualization, which was still a new workload back in the day, I think. And it looked like for virtualization, the stack was broken, because people were still using proprietary hardware in the back end. And even though VMware was going and talking a lot about the front end being more commodity, more Linux, more Windows, more x86 Intel servers. And Apple was beginning to have, at least personally on my life, was beginning to have an impact because of the App Store, iPhone. I was beginning to appreciate consumer grade design for the first time, because there was BlackBerry, which I was a user of for like 2-3 years, but then there was iOS, and there was a stark difference between the two. And I started to appreciate more things. Obviously Steve Jobs was a big influence for a lot of us. And I started to really start, looking at like, what are the things, like what's skeuomorphic design, what's flat design. Microsoft had started to talk about flat design back in the day. And in many ways, by 2010, Apple had started to move towards flat design. Skeuomorphic was more real, had bevels and shadows and depth and things like that. And flat was just flat. It was more Germanic and more Bauhaus in some sense, minimalist. So beginning to learn a little bit about design. And I think Nutanix was really a culmination of distributed systems and front-end consumer grade design for infrastructure. I think, of course, the next decade, we just made things really, 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 really simple. And people loved us for how we were more Apple-like than the stodgy infrastructure software experience that people have come to had in the past 20 years of IT.
So design has been a huge influence?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and for all of you here doing companies, you can't overdo design or over hire in design. Now it's hard because the talent is also hot and the market is hot. So knowing what it means to go and invest early in design, really important. And because it's the only natural way to think of the empty chair in the room. The empty chair belongs to the end user. And the only way for you to really remind yourself that you have to be more customer in, experience in, simplicity in, is to really have a great sense of design in the company.
Sure. So, Dheeraj, let's talk a little bit about how you got your first fundraise done. Right? What stage did you reach out to the VCs? Or I'm assuming the VCs reached out to you, most likely. Right?
Well, I mean, I was a first-time entrepreneur in 2009, and it was a global financial crisis. So it's not like things were hunky-dory. There's this thing called the bird in hand principle for entrepreneurship. So if you guys Google for bird in hand principle for entrepreneurship, it basically says, what do entrepreneurs do? What are they good at? Well, they have the bird in hand and they try to make the best of it. So it's the people they know, it's the things they know, and it's the skills they have they try to make the best of. So in our case, Bipul, who is now a CEO of Rubrik, he and I had overlapped for 4 years at Oracle. He had hired me and then we had become peers and we had become really good friends with those 4.5 years. And he was doing his first VC firm at Bloomberg Capital, small $100 million fund. Then he moved to Lightspeed before he did his own company, Rubrik. So he and I knew each other. He was looking for good deals. And then he also had the bird in hand principle. People he knows, he can trust, he can put some money in. So he wrote his, I think it was his second check, $1.5 million in 2009. And then he moved to Lightspeed in 2010, and we did a $10 million check from there as well in 2010. But a lot of it is actually just, vicarious trust.
Or was it by design?
A lot. I mean, look, they say not that we would not have been able to raise money, but many things just happen serendipitously in entrepreneurship. Luck plays a role, but obviously we had a very good team. The three of us had a strong profile. We had done distributed systems. Virtualization was a hot thing back in the day. And I think, one way or the other, things just fell into place,
Sure. So question to the audience, and then I'll come back to you. How many of you here are single founders? Single founders? And how many I'm assuming the rest of the founders are all people more than that. So this is a question which, a lot of us, I think, keep asking these guys. When you are choosing your co-founders and you had, two other founders and one of them, I think, left after a point. And
actually, both of them left in the first couple of years.
So I want to talk through that. Mm-hmm. So first of all, how did you decide, the three of you get together, and, what's the basis for putting together a team? Right? Mm-hmm. So is it based on friendship? Is it based on experience? And how do you decide who holds how much equity and some of those?
Yeah, I think, these are very personal, I would say, decisions and calls. Obviously, you look for complementarity. You look for pieces of the puzzle fitting together. And you basically roll the dice on some of these things. You look for friendship, you look for having fun, you look for common interests. And then you basically prepare for the worst, which is what we did. I mean, at some level in the next two years, when things didn't work out.
So between the three of you, did you decide who's going to do what?
Yeah, so I was a CEO from day one, Mohit was a CFO, and Ajit was a chief product officer. Okay. And that was again about pieces of the puzzle fitting together. When things don't work out, you basically need to be anti-fragile. The word that I have come to embrace a lot in life, there's a really good book called Anti-Fragile that I think all of you should read, especially the first 60 pages, if not more. And the author of Anti-Fragile is, I'm sure you've heard of Nicholas Taleb, and he talks about a spectrum. There's fragile systems. There is, in the middle, there is resilient systems where, you change the state of an object and you leave it and it restores back to its original state, but it didn't get any better than its original state. Those are resilient systems. And then if you push to the right, they're anti-fragile in the sense that when you change them from their stable state, they go back, but they improve and they get stronger along the way. And that's anti-fragility. So I think in these partnerships, you got to be anti-fragile. They were also equally anti-fragile. They all went to go and start unicorn companies of their own. Nutanix Mafia has created 5 multi-billion-dollar companies already.
Wow.
So you can see, Bipul with Rubrik, Mohit with Cohesity, Ajit with ThoughtSpot, and of course, Nutanix itself.
So, okay. So you talked about building the team and all of that, right? So I guess the two ways of doing it. One is top down and the other is bottom up, right? And one of the challenges I think many of the founders in this room would have is talent, as you know, is scarce, and talent attracts a premium. So how did you go about getting the first set of, apart from the founders? Of course, you guys had tremendous equity, I guess, by then in terms of brand equity. But how do you go about building a team?
Actually, we didn't have, yeah, sure, we had good resumes, but in 2009, there's also the headwind of global financial crisis, and things were not as frothy as they are right now. So in many ways, I think what was true 12, 13 years ago was that there was not enough money chasing ideas, but there were also not a whole lot of people actually who wanted to quit their day jobs, secure jobs, because they had just seen the worst depression in over 70, 80 years. It was probably bigger than the Great Depression in many ways. So it was not easy. And right now you have a lot of money, you have a lot of ideas, and people just want to switch. So it's, in many ways, it's equally difficult now as it was 12, 13 years ago, Again, bird in hand principle, it's like, what do entrepreneurs do? They make the best of the people they know and the trust that they might have with some of these people, and roll the dice. Just like they will roll the dice on you, you have to roll the dice on them. Make some bets on their skills, the ability to evolve. So, our first 10 people, it's not like we could just pick them up from anywhere and they'll just walk in, because the best people also, they're not looking for a change. So it takes a while. And many of these are highly skeptical people, because they're like, no, I think they apply the analytical sense, and they're highly analytical people as well. And they're like, I think there's a lot to lose here, because they have a bird in hand as well. They make a bird in hand decision not to really move unless they're a founder and they have a different kind of a passion. So I think the first 10 people, you got to make do with the best that you can get, who have the hunger to go do something different because they want to change the status quo around them. Of course, values were important, very important. So you can't inject hunger in people, period. Is either there's hunger or there's not. You would like to get people who are humble and people who are honest, because again, these 3 values cannot be injected after the fact, like, oh, now you're part of the company, let's see if you can bring some hunger in you. Let's see if we can make you any humbler, or let's see if you can make you any more honest or something, So we looked for those values. And then we learned other things like ambition. We had to learn with them to grow their ambition, because these are values you can teach people, and you can have them increase grow their ambition, to become bigger leaders, to end up owning more of the company, to end up growing the ambition of the company itself. Attention to detail, there's another value that you can grow with people. They don't have to have that from day one, but as long as they're willing to grow with you. I think anti-fragility is another one. How do you actually learn with people on how to get better with shocks, and improve when they make mistakes and things like that. So yeah, we were looking for some values that basically you can't go and retrofit in a character, and some values that we knew they could grow with us.
So let's talk a little bit about, I'm sure there must have been some hires which went wrong, right?
Yeah, in the first 3 years of Nutanix, it all looked like, we did, like, by the time I left, we did 6-7 billion in revenue. And we would have done more had we not shed our hardware and shed our, perpetual software licensing. We probably, when you say 1.3 billion, effectively it was 2.4 billion, but we got rid of hardware, we got rid of the perpetual software to do subscription for 1.3, 1.4. But the first 3 years were not a slam dunk. We had almost 3 near-death experiences in those 3 years. And by the way, it didn't get any better, because between 2014 and 2017, VMware and us, we were like at our throats.
They'll kill you.
Yeah. And so we had to, again, navigate those first 3 years. I mean, the first one was an older version of VMware 4.5, and we had a thesis that you could build a very large-scale system on top of an operating system like VMware, and we were building something that nobody had done before. It didn't look like for the first year that things will ever work, but again, luck. They had refreshed their software. It was a big overhaul of their software to 5.0, and things worked for us. But we tried hard for 6 months to see what could work, and if we hadn't tried hard, we probably would have given up. And so that's one thing. You have to really just keep trying and trying and trying, and then luck probably favors you. And another one that happened within 6 months of that, again tied to VMware, and some real-time scheduling needs that we had of the infrastructure that we were not getting from them. And the third one was we got callous about hardware. We were using commodity hardware. We had been using Supermicro, and we said, if Amazon can use Taiwan hardware, why can't we use directly some Taiwan hardware? And things were not to be, and we had to revert back in the middle of a quarter. This quarter we were supposed to do, I think the goal was to do 8 million or something. This was our fourth quarter or something of selling. And we had to stop ship and really change things along the way. So I think there's always these things that come to almost shut the company down that you have to be fully prepared for.
Sure. Let's talk about the initial customer acquisition part, right? How did you go about your first few set of customers?
Yeah, again, bird in hand, bird in hand principle. Yeah, I mean, you have your investors who basically give some calls and they pick up the phone, because the first year and a half to 2, most people that you talk to would say, why are you doing this? I don't think anybody needs it. Because there's a bell curve of adopters and believers or non-believers.
So how do you identify the early adopters?
Yeah, I think so. So the bell curve, I mean, I'm sure all of you have heard of the bell curve here. There is the innovators, and then you cross a chasm, get to the early adopters, you cross a chasm, you get to the early majority, you have to cross a bigger chasm to get to the late majority, and then there's a really big chasm to get to the laggards, who are basically really safe. They make safe decisions because they get fired for not making safe decisions. So when you talk to the people on the spectrum, you need to know who wants to really build a career in a new idea, who has the hunger to break some glass, and he can be your champion or she can be your champion for this thing, and it helps promote them. It basically gives them a promotion in their lives, and they're not talkers, they're walkers. Because there's a big difference between talk.
So most of those guys are not necessarily the C-level guys?
Yeah, they probably won't, because the C-level people are managing a portfolio. There could be some C-level people as well, but by the time they infuse that trust in their people down below, it fizzles out. So most of the time you have to really work grassroots up.
So how do you get to them?
Again, finding the people who are bubbling to do something different, because some of these people, they hate status quos. They don't like inefficiency, they don't like bureaucracy. They have a fire in the belly, and you need to know this when you're talking to them. And of course, they need to have some charter to try something unique and different. And there's a really good book that I will recommend all of you read. It's called Negotiating the Impossible by Deepak Malhotra. He's a really good friend of mine, and I've also learned a lot from him in the course of the last 7-8 years. He's an investor in DevRev, but we have known each other for the last 7-8 years now. He talks about this concept when negotiating is process before substance. Process being when you try to learn from people. So what's the exit criteria? What's success going to look like? Who's your decision maker, the economic buyer in this whole thing? What are the pain points we really should go and address so that it crosses the threshold where you end up paying something in? Because initially they might not pay you anything, but the fact that they're investing time is also a good signal, because there's really two things in life you can invest. There's no third thing: time or money. Either you can invest time or you can invest money. And I feel like when you talk to these people, you'll know who are the people who want to really go and break the mold of status quo and want to try something, and they will get a promotion along the way or two. So I think finding those innovators is really important, and getting to walk away from the laggards. People who will basically say, I'll get fired if I do anything like this, is also equally important.
Dhiraj, I want to go back to the product market fit question, right? So if there are 3 learnings from your journey, which you'd like to share with our audience here.
Yeah.
What are the top 3 things they should look at to make sure you get the right product?
Absolutely. So there is obviously, you can objectify this too. You can make this a little bit more objective with respect to PMF. And there's a good rule of thumb about whether your existing customers, your existing users are doubling down on you or not. So what do I mean by that? They could double down with their time. So their daily active use is increasing. So that's one way to say that this is not something where you have to sell and run or deploy and run or train and run. This is where you can train and stay. And the fact that they are willing to recommend this to other people, which means they're also doubling down with their trust. Now they've come trust you, and because they trust someone else, they're willing to recommend this to 2 other people. And finally, whether they're willing to invest more in terms of money. So because a good business is really a flywheel. You basically get new customers, you make them into existing customers, you make more money from the existing customers, but on the other side, you add new customers who become existing customers, you get more from the existing customers, you add new customers. And if
how do you, this hunting versus farming part, right?
Yeah.
So did you guys have any kind of metrics?
Yeah, I mean, and today in the SaaS world, people talk about the R metrics, the pirate metrics. I'm sure all of you must have seen it. You acquire, you adopt, you have revenue, you renew, and there's a fifth, the third R, retention, you retain them. So I think, again, the idea is, and in our day, which was Nutanix, was about more nodes. Are people buying more nodes, and are they putting more applications? Because applications are the things that consume more nodes. We were seeing that thing emerge where initially, when you're very new, 100% of your revenue comes from new customers. Every quarter, that number should look a little bit more towards existing customers, And I think in the first year, if you can get 30-40% from existing customers, that's a healthy business, which means your existing customers are coming to buy more from you. Now, you don't want to overdo it either, because if it starts to look like 60-70% from existing customers, then the flywheel starts to stop. Right? So I think there's a really healthy, in fact, there's a regression on this. You can probably even put a rule of 40 on this, where you need to have enough new customers that you're really paying top marketing dollars for, and you're spending more time, and because it takes time to build trust with a new customer, a lead, a prospect to a new customer, but it should take a whole lot less time to really go and make money with existing customers where you've already built some trust.
Sure. I'm going to ask you a question about, which I'm sure a lot of people hear because they're all very early stage, about growth versus profitability. How do you?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a rule of 40 here. You probably could go Google for the rule of 40, but you put
free cash flow plus.
Yeah, so free cash flow as a percentage of revenue versus growth as a percentage of revenue, because both as a percentage of revenue, you can add them.
I think you may want to talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so
does everyone here know the rule of 40?
No, so the rule of 40 is So think of the fact that you're growing really fast. Let's say you're growing at 100%. But and this is growth as a percentage of your overall revenue. And suppose your free cash flow is negative 60% as a percentage of revenue. So you grew 100% and you burned cash at negative 60%. You are at 40% because 100 plus minus 60 is 40, right? We'll take another example. You're growing 20% and your free cash flow is 20%. So 20 plus 20 is 40. Both are good companies. If anything, the former company could decide to not grow at 100 and maybe their free cash flow will reduce from negative 60 to negative 40 or negative 20 or something. So there's an optionality. They're saying, I think I need to put more into growth because I know I can get more from existing customers. When you know that you actually can go get more from existing customers, you know that your marketing and sales spend will actually be more efficient with existing customers. You will be more growth heavy, growth biased. If you know that you cannot go get more from existing customers, you'll probably not be that growth biased. You'll then go back to, this other case of 2020 or maybe 10 and 30 or maybe 5 and 35, where you're only growing 5%, but your free cash flow as a percentage of revenue is 35. That when added up together is still 40. So it's basically a balance. You have to really look at this as walking a tightrope where you can dial the knob this way and you get more growth, but you also burn some cash. But then the balance is 40. The fact that you're actually growing it, when you add these two up, it's 40, is actually a good barometer to say whether I'm really building a good business.
So I think one of the challenges most companies out of India have is obviously the sales and marketing piece, right? So I think even in this audience, we'll have a bunch of people who are doing brilliant work technically, but they just haven't been able to figure out how to get in front of customers and make the investments in sales and marketing and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Any advice around how to do that?
So I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek, for many of you might have heard him on LinkedIn. I mean, I've been following him yeah, I mean, even it's in the last 5-6 years, especially because the word why became important for me. Why is a simple word. It's like a commodity word. Anybody knows the word why. But if you really have to focus on what sales really is, or what does it mean to really convince somebody to use something, try something, buy something, it comes back to why. And I think it's the most underappreciated word in business, the word why. Of course, people have talked about the sequence of 5 whys training and how do you really go back to 5 whys, why, and then another why. But the pain point is important, because, and Simon talks about this, that most people, 99% of the world basically starts with a what. What do I do? Right? And they quickly get to a solution, they get to an answer. And this is a solution looking for a problem now, because the what is still looking for the why. Like, okay, so why do we even have this? So he talks about the why, and then not the what, which again, probably the last 0.9% of this 1% that's left goes from why to what to how, if at all. He says you go from why to how did you build this? How are you going to do this? And then get to the what. And I think it's really important to have that culture, that mindset in you. How do you start with the why? Because then you start with the customer, then you start with the pain point. Then you first walk over to them, and unknowingly you will walk with them to where you want them to be. But you first have to walk over to them. And that is empathy. The fact that you walked over to them rather than basically saying, here I am, here is my solution. Why don't you come over to me, change everything the way you do? Because people don't like revolutions. Even the most innovative people, you talked about these innovators and early adopters, they don't like revolutions. They appreciate evolutions. So you have to walk over to them, tell them one small step at a time, let's do this, let's do this, let's do. And before long, they'll have walked over to where you were standing to begin with. I also learned a lot from design in this. There's a really good designer in the US. He was there, Raymond Loewy, who actually did amazing brand creation. Loewy is Loewy, Loewy. And he talks about this principle. It's an acronym, and it basically spells out really well. It's called MAYA, the MAYA acronym, MAYA, the MAYA acronym. And MAYA stands for most advanced yet acceptable. Most advanced yet acceptable. So many really, really good products, they fail, like Google Glasses. They failed the Maya test, because you could be sitting in front of me and that could be a Google Glass and recording everything without me knowing about it. I'm uncomfortable. So it was most advanced technology, but not acceptable to society. And you can go on and on and on talking about Maya, large companies throwing a ton of money at the problem and thinking that money solves everything, and they failed the Maya test. So I think in sales and marketing, in the way you communicate with your customers, Maya is very important as well, because when you think of empathy, when you think of what's in it for them, when you talk about the process of evolution rather than the substance of your solution, I think it helps a lot.
So essentially you're saying you have to get really intimate with your customers.
Yeah, and then get in the shoes, because getting in the shoes of the customer, again, at most 1% of the people are good at. Because the world has not been endowed with free empathy. Let's just face it. I mean, even today we are split on Ukraine. Like, really? Like, this is this historical 100 years of war, whatever, territorial issues. But at the end of the day, it starts with empathy. Independent of all that, look, we've had issues in Kashmir and Arunachal and places like that. But you need to have that point of view about what does it mean to be in the shoes of those people who are at war right now. And I think similarly, I think it's really important to say what does it mean to be in the shoes? Because even the laggards in this thing that talk with the bell curve, you need to empathize with them, because someday when you're successful, you need to go back to them. So why burn bridges with them? And the reason why they're not accepting a product right now is because of X, Y, and Z reasons. They get paid to not take risks and stuff.
Okay.
So I think in sales and marketing, messaging is important. Like, I mean, one of the things what do we think America is really good at? Storylining. Storylining is about the why. Like, the why is done really well. And I think I can't give any sort of more tactical answers to this question, but to say, go embrace why, the how, the what thinking.
So we call it the 5 principles of journalism, right? Why, what, when, where, who, how, and when.
Now that's too many too, but I think the other piece on design is minimalism. And it's true for messaging, it's true for your product, it's true for your features, it's true for your capital allocation, because that's the other piece of the puzzle. That and I continue to learn on this. It's not like I've been any 10x better, but because capital allocation for entrepreneurs, it's probably the most important thing. And it's equally true when you look at your pane of glass, your UI, because you have a capital that's 35-inch screen that you have to allocate to things. And we end up putting a lot into the 35-inch screen, or even this mobile real estate. How do you allocate capital to the least number of things? Is the degree of minimalism.
So that brings me to the point. I was going to come to this, the next one, right? As the CEO of a large company, let's say you had 5 dials which you were constantly looking at. What would those 5 dials be?
It's a profound question. It can go on for hours. I can sit here and talk about those 5 dials.
And I guess it changes as you evolve.
Well, I think some things should never change if you're a thriving business. Customer success, employee success. I mean, I've always looked at employees like customers, because the market is frothy. It's really hard. It's very competitive, and people can move from this job to the next job in no time because of how much, especially in software and tech, it's really hard to
retain,
bring the sense of purpose. And So there's another really good author I like, Dan Pink. You folks should look at the 3 principles of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So AMP, he calls it the AMP framework: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So customer success, employee success, efficiency, which is really shareholder success. In that order, I would say, become really important. Customer success, employee, because your customers also become your shareholders over time. They buy your stock when you go public. Employees already have equity, so they're also shareholders in many ways. And finally, the retail shareholder. We talk about efficiency, and think hard about the group, the rule of 40. I think it's really important that existing customers start to become more efficient for you, even though you might end up investing in top of the funnel, getting more at the top of the funnel. The good thing is that in SaaS, we're speaking of a new paradigm called PLG, product-led growth, which again is easier said than done, because it's like the word design, it's like the word simple, it's like the word why. PLG is one of those things which everybody will talk about, but nobody will know how to do it, right? And I think SaaS has an opportunity to build an efficient business, just like B2C was. I mean, in many ways, there's a lot to learn from the B2C world in the land of B2B, which I think will bring more efficiency to businesses too. So I gave you 3 because I believe in the power of 3. I can't remember 5. But if I had to go from anything above 3, I would go 5, but not 4.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a few questions around, how critical, obviously in this journey, you would have had a bunch of almost like a personal board as well as the board, and then a bunch of trusted advisors, and then a bunch of partnerships you would have built. How much time do you have to invest in doing all of this? Again, I'm not asking for a metric.
No, a lot. And I'll tell you, in the last 2-3 years of Nutanix, I was putting like 250,000 miles a year. I mean, by the time I got done, I had 3 million United miles on my global services. So it tells you that you have to travel, you have to speak with customers. I mean, we had employees in 60 countries and customers in 150 countries. You need to, especially the old B2B, because we had an on-prem business, you had to shake hands. I mean, every $1 million deal was that important, and we're doing quite a few of those. I mean, out of the 6-7 billion that we had earned from our customers, 3 to 4 billion had come from only 300 customers. So you can imagine there was a high concentration of very large customers as well. So you got to build those partnerships, those relationships. Employees were everywhere as well, because we had an on-prem business. So we had a lot of salespeople in almost 50 plus countries. And they're also looking for that ray of hope that somebody from HQ will come and spend some time and learn from customers and learn from me of how hard things are. And not just how hard things are with competitively, but also process-wise, quoting, configuring, pricing, channel discounting. There's a lot of process that you need to actually go learn from the field as well that comes into this.
Sure. So from a go-to-market, how critical was the relationship with the large cloud players and the typical Indian IT services firms for you?
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say, and for many of your young companies, nobody builds your brand. You and you alone have to build your brand, because nobody has the time. If you think about it, and you haven't earned the respect of the market. So most of the ecosystem, they are at most fence sitters. So if you look at the bell curve, the non-believers, the naysayers, the fence sitters, and then the believers. I mean, first 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever, even 10 years later, you'll have a ton of naysayers, a ton of fence sitters, and maybe some believers, and you got to keep working on it. I mean, imagine Microsoft doing Bing. Nobody believed they could do search, even though it's a very, very large company, and I could go on and on. Google doing Google Plus. Nobody believed they'd do social networks well, and they couldn't, So just because you're big doesn't mean that You won't have a ton of naysayers and fence sitters, So you got to keep working on this all the time, and also know when you are basically crossing the boundaries of essentialism, minimalism, trying to do too much. Microsoft eventually simplified under Satya, saying, okay, we're not going to do too much. We cannot be Apple. We know we cannot be Apple. So let's be Microsoft. They got rid of a lot of businesses. They got deeper down into cloud computing. And the rest is history. So imagine this is one of the largest companies facing this earth. And they also face a lot of these dilemmas that young startups are actually facing all the time as well.
So you had several pivots, right, during your journey. Which was the most difficult one, and what any learnings you can share with?
Well, the most difficult one was the one for which, because I lost all my hair. And that's once you go public and you realize that your business model is not modern enough. It's not modern enough. We didn't have a modern business model.
The licensing model.
Yeah, more just packaging everything. I'll talk a little bit about that too. So we did an amazing job of content at Nutanix. And I say content, I mean the love for the customer, like they just loved it, But we didn't take risks on distribution, because there's really two sides to a business: content and distribution. You build stuff and you distribute stuff, So it was my first startup. I only want to take so much risk, and I took risk on the architecture, technology, product side, but not on the distribution side. So we copied the distribution models of Cisco and NetApp and EMC and VMware and some Oracle over time as well. But then by 2016, I realized that the cloud is upon us and we have to distribute differently, and we have to sell smaller, shorter things, because the biggest innovation of the cloud was the credit card. The fact that you can swipe a credit card, and commerce was so simple, no questions asked, because of which you could window shop, you could stand by, you could tinker, you could, no questions asked, no human beings involved. You could use a product for 10 cents today and $2 tomorrow and $100 a month from now. It was brilliant, the idea of distributing software like that. And that was basically my 4.5 year journey after going public to convince the investors that this is the right thing to do. I feel like that's the way of the future, where you're going to use the word PLG for that. But how you do more consumer grade thinking from the product, how you nudge from the product, how you upsell from the product, how you cross sell from the product. And again, there will be a funnel. You'll need inside salespeople for the middle of the funnel, and you need enterprise salespeople at the bottom of the funnel. But there's a rite of passage. You cannot just get there as a young company. You have to start with B2C thinking. I mean, even above product is SEO and thinking hard about search engine optimization, and how do you intercept the intent of a user of Google who is trying to come and ask a question. So your content strategy at the top of the funnel, then your product strategy in the middle, in the second half of this, then inside sales, then I mean, a lot of this stuff is the future of anything enterprise. I mean, people say enterprise software is different. But I feel like, companies like ServiceNow are also now ripe for disruption, because they have a really top heavy, top 3, 4, 5,000 now. They've done a good job with those companies, but I think grassroots is becoming more and more powerful. I think that democracy of distribution is here to stay.
Okay. I think I have 2 last questions and then we'll throw it open. You also did a lot of M&As, right? Quickly at a high level, what were you looking for when you are looking to acquire, and what was the kind of governance you put in place to make sure those acquisitions actually worked out for you?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is, what do you learn from them? Again, you have to have a little bit more of a learning mindset with these younger companies, because by the time you grow to become that big, the enemy starts to creep in. The enemy is within, like, oh, we can do it this way. We have been used to that way. And it's a really good book that Frank Slootman has come about. Is Amp It Up. Some of you should actually read it.
Amp It Up.
Amp It Up. He's the CEO of Snowflake. And he talks about as companies grow, so does the ratio of passengers to drivers, right? And you need to be very mindful of that. What does it mean to keep this ratio low so you have more drivers than passengers, because you have to really, go and maybe even navigators as opposed to everybody just sitting there, and saying, tell me what to do. And what else can I do anyway, kind of stuff. And there's a lot of passengers that you start to accumulate. So when you go and acquire, or at least start talking to a younger company, you learn new things. You learn about things that you just didn't think about, weren't good at, simply because there was so much inertia. Because you also come to have inertia of motion. It's like, oh, we can't move this thing in any other direction because of X, Y, and Z. So it's learning. It's being able to see if you can get some really good leaders who can come and change the course of your current thinking. And I think lastly, integration. Like, what does it mean to really integrate well? Because like most things in life, it's an hourglass. I don't look at it as the funnel where you've just acquired and you're done. Once you acquire, then the people, how do you retain them? How do you nurture the leaders? How do you get their customers to integrate with you? How do you get the products to integrate well together? Because you can end up having lots and lots of products that people are like, well, why am I buying from you just because I have one contract? I can go 5 products from 5 different best of breed companies and I can integrate it myself. If you can't, or if you're lazy to integrate your products, and that's what happens. A lot of M&As end up being extremely scattered. All you have is a single salesperson to integrate that experience, but it's not an integrated experience. So you've got to do a lot of that. And I think that is the biggest barometer of success, where the acquisition in some sense melds into yours and you learn from them as much as they learn from you.
Okay. So you moved out from an exec role, I think 2 years ago.
Well, I'm not on the board of Nutanix anymore because I have to go and do transactions. I barely sold any stock for those 10, 11 years, and being on a public board, you can't do enough of that stuff. So at some point, I think I realized it's good to be an investor rather than an operator investor, because you're operating as a Section 16 officer of a public company. And I had just turned 45 in 2020. And I'm like, I would like to learn about SaaS and PLG and its new web distribution. And those 10 years were great at me learning about design and learning about what it means to gain customer love and, making $6-7 billion along the way in terms of revenue. I think to apply this to a new world of probably as close to B2C as it gets. I don't think I would have ever done a B2C company, but now I can learn about B2C through the facet of a B2B company. And there's a lot to learn. I mean,
so it also goes to tell you learning never stops.
Never. I mean, I am a big fan of Vinod. Vinod and I are very close. And he's invested again in DevRev. And he's 66, 67, some such age. Obviously, one of the hardest working people I know of, but also has continued to relate to the masses and the generations like Gen Zs and millennials, and reads a lot and pushes everybody like me to read a lot as well. So there's no end to this timeless journey. Learning is a timeless journey. And as long as we can be that, we are vulnerable, we are humble, we know we don't know a lot, which is the thing that most customers appreciate. Your employees appreciate when you say, look, I don't think I know what this is about, but let's go learn together if you can.
So Dheeraj is going to share his reading list with us after this. Okay. So
I'll send a list. I mean, there's some really good, I'm reading about new things too, because, we speak of philanthropy. We have a family foundation now, and we are learning with universities. We just give a very large check to UT Austin for the Center of Computational Oncology, because you want to see how biology and computing can meld, can blur the lines, and it's blurring. The lines are blurring between computing and biology. I couldn't have done a company in biotech or life sciences, but if we can invest in those things and we can go, donate to research in these things. And I think in the next 10 years, I'll learn a lot about biology, even though I'm not operating a company in that space.
Sure. Okay. I think we'll I can go on. We can do this for
Yeah,
so many
forever.
hours,
In
right?
the interest of your
But
time.
I'm going to throw the floor open, and I think there's a mic going around. So just quickly introduce yourself, and then.
Namaste MSR and DHub for providing this opportunity. Namaste Dhiraj bhai. फिर से भाग्यनगर में स्वागत है आपका. So I am Pradeep Palreddy, founder for Transcend Technology Group. We are outsourced product firm based in Hyderabad and in the US. So I really appreciate your 3 near-death experience, because I have had my own while doing a services company. 200,000 in 2010 is a lot of money in the US, and we burnt it and lost it. But anyway, so what did you learn from those 3 near-death experiences? How did you apply to DevRev? And how did Dheeraj Pandey as a person change? And what does DevRev do? Sorry.
Sure, absolutely. Looks like there were 4 questions there, so I'm going to take each one of them at a time. So again, I love metaphors, and the imagery matters to me. So if you're in a flight and there's turbulence, I think the first thing passengers look at is the crew. Monica is one of our DevRevelers, and she was part of the crew, and doing a lot of these, so she can relate to this. But if the crew panics, then passengers are panicking 10x more. So it's really important that when you have such a near-death experience, leaders cannot panic. And I think that's the true essence of entrepreneurship, where you are just breathing better than everybody else, and you're normalizing the highs and lows, because you'll get a really good win and a really bad loss, and you'll get a crash and unavailability and customers shouting at you, and these kind of things where you're like, wow, do we have to shut shop now? I think so. In all these things, the thing that we did really well was we didn't blame anyone, we didn't point fingers. We knew the only way to roll back is to roll forward. And I think this is something that people who are deep into databases know this. The way databases implement rollback is to roll forward. I think it comes back to the culture, because not giving up only happens when people around you have the psychological safety that I'm not going to be blamed for a mistake, actually. So culture is very important to recover. And to not just be resilient, but also be anti-fragile. Because as I said, resilience is good, but anti-fragile, which means you became better at things. So, making sure that you don't commit the same mistake again, it's etched in your memory forever. You keep bringing it back. Every year you talk about the story, you tell the story of that failure, that mistake, you celebrate, you laugh, you have fun along the way, because that's the only way to not commit the same mistake twice. Which is basically one of the aspects of anti-fragility, is you learn something from it, not to do it again. And I think in the last 15 years, I think I've become more patient, living my name a little bit more and more. And the more I do that, I think the better entrepreneur I actually think can become, because everybody around you wants that psychological safety, that look, anything that happens, there's no blame game going around. What does DevRev do? We're trying to really understand the space of PLG, make distribution really more efficient for SaaS companies. And if we do this well for ourselves, we can then bring it out to everybody else. So what are we doing for our immediate customers in the next 18 months? Is to really bring the developer close to the customer, because when you're trying to get product market fit, you don't have the luxury of support people, field reps, field SEs, channel partners, system integrators, procurement people. You have none of those people. So the makers, i.e. the product managers and the developers, have to be really close and in real time with the end users and customers. And we are building a platform that doesn't just manage their back-end work, but also converts it to front-end work efficiently, back and forth, makes them able to chat with their end users in real time on the app itself, rather than go to yet another app. We're going to unveil this as a beta program starting April. So encourage those of you who are interested to sign up on our site, and hopefully plan to go GA in October. We have a plan to go GA in October. And along the way, we look at all these tools that product managers, developers, support people use. And what has happened is this utter complexity of lots and lots and lots of tools, but none of them have a common language of product. Like, okay, so what's happening in the product? Who uses the product? What's the quality of the product? Because if everybody agreed on the product, then you won't have a lot of departmental silos of sales and marketing and engineering and support and DevOps and SRE ops and things like that. So we believe that product-led anything can only be true and authentic if everybody believes in the product language. So we're building a new system of record that's very product-centric. And by proxy, customer-centric, because the only thing that binds builders and customers together is the product. So if you can have everybody in the company come around to just organizing all information, all chats, all collaboration, all nudges, all likes, all everything from the point of view of product and its overall ontology, because the product thinking also will require you to break it down into things that developers relate to and things that product managers price and do usage on and what customers buy. You know, there's different sort of taxonomies, and product has microservices, has components and libraries. That's what developers relate to because they believe in building microservices all day long. But in all of this, they don't get to appreciate features and capabilities and APIs, the things that customers use. So we're trying to really bring it all together in one system and hopefully come out with something that eventually becomes an operating system for the product-led growth era. There was another hand in the back. Go ahead, so you have the mic, yeah.
Hello. Hi, Dheeraj. Congratulations for your fantastic journey and sharing your perspective.
It's a small journey, so I think
well, a long way to go. It's building $1 billion business is not that easy, and perspective from the valley. So there is a connection because I worked in the valley too, particularly in the hardware. And when I saw Nutanix, right, I could immediately connect because my former boss. He joined Nutanix as a CEO, Rajiv Ramaswamy.
Oh, of course, yeah, he's a good friend of mine. So.
Yeah, he was the senior VP at Broadcom Corporation where I worked. So, small world. Mm-hmm. So my question is on the profitability. Like, right now, like I worked in Silicon Valley and their profitability is very, very important. But these days we are seeing a lot of unicorns being generated in India too. But they are not generating profits. So what's your take on the profitability, how important it is for the sustainability of the company, for the startup?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this about 25, 30 minutes ago. This topic came up. I don't know if you were there. But we basically talked about this rule of 40, where you try to balance growth and free cash flow as two sides of the same coin. So when money is cheap, you end up biasing towards growth. And when money is expensive, you end up biasing towards free cash flow. And both of these are the percentage of revenue. So you can add them up, and growth as a percentage of revenue, last year's revenue, and free cash flow as a percentage of revenue. Again, these are both numbers that can be added. They're additive. And if they add up to 40, you are running a good business because now you're basically saying I have optionality. I can dial down growth. I can increase free cash flow, or I can dial down free cash flow and increase growth, provided you can go make more money from existing customers. So to give you sort of a summary view of this, the flywheel of a business has to work, and the flywheel is not just existing customers, because then eventually you become an IBM. If you're not getting enough new customers, and it might be because you have saturated your TAM, that you don't have any more new customers, then all you do is downstream financial engineering, which is more efficiency, more efficiency, more efficiency, sales and marketing, support, R&D. It's all about below the line as opposed to above the line, because above the line is revenue and cost of goods shipped, and then below the line is everything else. So as a business matures and growth slows down, and then your eyeballs start to go from growth of revenue to cost of goods shipped to sales and marketing spend to R&D spend to taxes and amortization and being able to go and invest in other companies. So you start looking at EBITDA. The whole thing is based on growth. The more you're growing, provided you're growing with this rule of 40 in mind, you will have to balance your P&L accordingly. But you can't have it where you're growing really fast, your free cash flow is utterly negative, and they don't add up to 40 or 50 or 60 or whatever number you want to come up with.
Mr. Dhiraj, we are very happy to see you. My name is Murli.
Likewise.
Don't you think actually these young entrepreneurs, new entrepreneurs need to have the exposure of marketing and even the legal aspects? And what's your view on that, please?
Yeah, I talked about marketing a little bit. The word marketing, rightfully, for most developers, they're skeptical of the word marketing. You can't market to developers if you're trying to sell to developers. It has to be about building trust. The word trust is important for all buyers. I think the word trust is really important. Again, it's a very commodity word, but if you try to double click, triple click, you'll realize that trust is really hard to establish with anybody, let alone a buyer. And a lot of it comes back to being authentic on the why of the thing. And if the more you think of the why, the more you get pushback from skeptics, the more you fix the why, the more you keep polishing the why. And then in a couple of years, clarity emerges. Like, wow, so this is it that they're really looking for. So I think marketing, if you leave the word aside, let's use the word brand. Brand is a better word that way. A lot of people say, oh, they're using their brand. I'm like, at the end of the day, no brand, even as big as Microsoft or Google or Oracle, could ever go and thrust a product down the throat of any new buyer or user. Because I think in this day and age, those days are gone. 30 years ago, 25 years ago, when the only way you hear about a new product, this is pre-internet and pre-mobile, was through an enterprise sales rep, or a channel partner. I think now your potential buyer is almost aware of everything that's happening around them. They've researched everything. They know the pros and cons. By the time you're talking to them, you're really trying to figure out what's in it for you to really go build that trust with them so that they're not looking at 10 other things. So I would say brand is also not an output. It's not an input. So you don't say, I use my brand to go build trust. No. You figure out a way to build the trust to then build the brand, and so what goes into building trust are the inputs. Trust is a output and brand is a bigger output after that, and a lot of it is basically reversed. In most of the world, people use the word brand as if, or they input the brand and they got the output of revenue. No, brand is the outcome. You need to do the karma and keep doing the karma, and the phal will be the brand or the revenue or whatever else.
Hi, Dheeraj. Morning.
I think that he has been persistent, so we should go.
Hello, Dhiraj. Great talk. Very inspiring. I'm Nikhil. I work at T-Hub, run 2 accelerator programs in partnership with Facebook and Qualcomm. So I also share similar enthusiasm towards Nassim Nicholas Taleb. So one of his quotes is, we should reward people, not ridicule them for thinking the impossible. So my question is, what did you do in your entrepreneurial life to reward people who took the risk, and also for the people who took the risk and failed?
Yeah, first of all, great question, great quote as well. And thanks for running T-Hub. This is, when I came here, I'm like, wow, this is impressive. What's happening here in Telangana as well. I'm guessing T stands for Telangana? Okay, good. All right. Interchangeably. Got it. You couldn't use Telugu because Andhra also is Telugu. So, right. So what do you find in such people? I think first of all, they have a fire in the belly, so there's passion that really comes out, and that energy, you want to figure out a way to harness it. And they might be doing something completely divergent from where your core business is. And that's where the real sort of challenges and opportunities are, is how do you bring them a little bit closer to the Maya thinking? Like, so what's Maya here, and how do we really go and test this out and experiment it? And I think also learn from these people, because they are people who want to break glass and they want to do things differently, and they hate the tyranny, the word tyranny of status quo. They feel that status quo is tyrannical, and they don't like the dictatorship of status quo, so there's something there for entrepreneurs to really keep these people close to you, and at the very least learn about new things that the world is doing out there that none of us might be exposed to. But also not just learn from them, but also have them learn about Maya and how would they do this, and who the first user could be. How would they go about the existing customers, because that's also the bird in hand that they probably could leverage. And if it's too far off from the existing customer, if you were to think of a visual of honeycombs, I mean, there are lots of hexagons that are connected to each other. So if you are this hexagon, that's your business. I think at best you can look at the adjacent, the first order hexagon is where you can really go to. If you try to go to a second order, you're dead. There's no point doing a second order thing, because there's a lot of leap. You have to leap, jump these hexagons in the middle to get to the other one. So in the honeycomb thinking, it has to be adjacent to where the first order thinking, So those ideas are worth investing in. If they have a second order idea that's too much of a leap of faith, you try to see if you can get them closer to your existing customer, closer to your existing product, closer to things that your end users can actually relate to as well, as opposed to a completely new end user that'll take a whole lot longer to get to.
Hey, Dhiraj.
Maybe there's one of the ladies in the room. So,
Yeah, sure.
and we'll get to you too, sir. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Dhiraj. Thank you so much. And thank you, T-Hub, for this. I'm Michelle Patel, founder of Satisfied. So I love what you said about trust, because that's exactly what we are doing. We are repositioning customer and employee experience into trust experience. And the way we do it is to measure and understand consistency, which is very underrated in our field. So I would like to know, and I'm passionate about consistency. What are the consistent habits that you've had from your early days as an entrepreneur, like maybe in your day-to-day routine, that has factored and maybe optimized for efficiency?
It's a really, really profound question, by the way. But congratulations, first of all, and having the courage to be a woman entrepreneur. So I think we need more in this room. I know. But I think I absolutely believe in what you said. But it also goes without saying that it takes courage to be one. So you should not underwhelm and undersell yourself. It's very important. Given everything that we have 2 daughters, twin girls, and I'd love for them to be great at engineering and technology, and that's why I keep reminding this to myself as well. But coming to your question, consistency. I think again it has to be customer in, employee in. Employees also customers. Access to them is very important. So they need to, the smallest CIO with a 50K deal would call me from anywhere in the world, and I had to be accessible. And WhatsApp had made it possible. They were not on our support portal. They were not technical enough to be on our support portal, but they were all on WhatsApp with me, and I had to be accessible to them. So it's really important to be accessible. On Slack, I was accessible to every employee, and those are the things that managers start to miss. When a company starts to be run by managers as opposed to be founders, they start to really look at the zero-sum game of my time versus what's important in my time versus what's not. And it's a very fine balance. You can start to budget a time where everything becomes a zero-sum game. We're like, well, if I talk to the employee, I won't be able to go to improve this process for this thing that I need to do in terms of efficiency. I think you've got to really balance the two, because both are important. The informalism of talking to the employee, being accessible to the employee, is as important as the formalism of efficiency and process and improved everything. So I was very accessible to both customers and employees. I was constantly reading, learning from others, because many a time when you're having this 20-minute thing with someone, it's the fastest way to learn rather than go read a book. So I think I was lazy in that sense. I was constantly learning from people. And I think I've always been very confident about having a discussion on a topic that I don't know anything about, but in half an hour, I'll know a lot about, at least enough to be dangerous, and that was because I was good at interviews, going from this question to the next question to the next question. Even in a new culture, new language, new biology thinking, whatever, I've been good at that. So when I sit with anybody with any other field, like nuclear fusion, I can have a really good, we are trying to invest in nuclear fusion companies now with my family fund. And I feel like you need to be very good at that. Curiosity. And in a way it's fearless, because you know that even if they judge you, who cares? Because I think at the core of entrepreneurship is, courage, the point where even if people judge you, it doesn't matter, Yeah, nothing actually. You know why? I mean, I say this I wrote this on my Quora session in 2015. What's the essence of entrepreneurship? I think they're not irrational people. Entrepreneurs are not irrational. I think all of you will relate to this. I think we all say this in our heads. The worst is not bad enough, right? The worst is not bad enough. And that's why we skydive, because if you look down, we would never jump. The reason why we jump is because we looked straight and we said, okay, there's a guy parachuted to me or a gal, and they'll be able to open the parachute at the right time and things will happen. So I think the worst is not bad enough is something that drives all of us, and hopefully drives, your business just as much,
How much time do we have, Dheeraj?
We have that gentleman, and I can do another 2 minutes after this.
Yeah. Hi, Dhiraj. Well, thanks for being here. My name is Sridhar, founder of Thampe Private Limited. It's been really great journey. You started from Patna, took $3,000 from Mumbai-based trust, and you made this such big journey. So we are a product like simplifying digital payments using biometric and artificial intelligence. The fintech space in India is itself 80 billion by 2025, and if you take global, it is $800 billion. So since you said that you are also investor, what kind of parameters you look in a startup, and will you be interested in fintech space? And my second question will be, since I'm a single founder, I started discussion with Mobido, which is Ukraine company, but unfortunately this thing happened, so our discussion halted. So since you said that you are accessible to even for a 50K company founder, so can we connect with you in collaboration with the T-Hub and take it forward?
Absolutely. I mean, look, fintech is near and dear, because we talk about this in DevRev. There's dev transactions and there's rev transactions, which is your developers, customers transactions. And it's great to be in that path of the rev transaction, because then you can take a simple 10 basis point cut and you're a great business, because you just need enough of these 10 basis points, millions of those happening in a week or a month, and you make good money actually. So the world is getting split into subscription, which is dev transactions, or your immediate customers' seats by the month that you get paid for. And there's transactions there that are worth really monetizing, but then there's their customers' transaction, which is a second order amplification, which we all look up to. Like, at some point when DevRev is successful, we should monetize the rev transaction. Fintech is a great example of rev transactions, making money on rev. And I'm learning a lot about the space, so you can send me an email or a LinkedIn.
I already sent my LinkedIn message to you.
Good. So I think you're already ahead of the curve. And on the second question, I can connect you to people who might know in some of these places as well.
We are focusing on contactless payment. Just show your thumb finger and payment is done.
Awesome.
So we want to build that
for somebody coming from outside. It's painful for me to pay anything in India, because the credit cards are like, I'm like, where's this OTP? I don't have an India cell phone number. It's hard. So make it worth my while and I'll invest in you.
We are going to disturb public space as well, public transport space as well.
We'll take this and 2 more questions and we'll call it done. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm your big fan.
And so am I a big fan of SaaS, so I'm going to learn something from you as well.
Slept only 2 hours to make it here from across the city.
Thank you.
So what are some smart ways to identify new API-based business model opportunities, considering a lot of the abstract opportunities have been already taken.
That's what they said back in the day. I mean, imagine when horses were there as carriages, people said faster horses.
Agree. I'm a non-technical guy, but I strongly believe in this segment after reading Ask Your Developer, reading your mission statement and hiring a lot of engineers. It's not that easy for me to understand what are the microservices multiple companies are building which are redundant. So what are some smart ways to look at this?
Well, so APIs, I'll say this, and I repeat what I just said before as well. So the fact that you're selling APIs means that you want developers to build something on top of it. So you need to understand their customer too. Like, what is it that they're trying to do for their customers? What is their core transaction, that your API transaction will help as well, right? There's a good book, you guys should read it. It's called Modern Monopolies. Really good book, Alex Mozed. And the core of the book is the core transaction. Like, do you know your core transaction? And is this core transaction really helping your customers or their customers? And I think that's where a lot of API thinking will come out of. APIs are still pretty raw. I think we're looking at lots of CRUDL for those of you who relate to create, read, update, delete, and list. These are the 5 ways. Basic APIs are CRUDLs, but the better APIs are mashups. You join 2 things, and because for those of you who learn SQL or no SQL, the where clause is important. It's basically you're trying to do a join with something. The filters, group buys, the order buys, the fact that you can actually weave one query into another. Learn from SQL, you learn a lot about APIs, because these things that have been there for 40 years in IT is what APIs have to be really good at. And a lot of it comes down to mashups, because people love mashups. Like, oh, now I don't have to deal with joining this table with that table. Your APIs are good at those. And by the way, it'll help you also clarify your object model thinking and the way you persist data and state and things like that.
Okay, one last question.
I think that gentleman.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Rahul from Bharat Cloud. So thank you very much, Dheeraj. I think whatever you said, along with your anti-fragile, I think you're also following something anti-aging. Your photograph, looks.
That was my B2B look, and this is my B2C look.
Awesome.
I have to be younger to understand PLG and relate to a lot of SaaS founders who are probably a millennial, if not a Gen Z here. I actually.
Exactly. That's what was my question. Like, after building your empire from startup, individual startup,
and an empire, but yeah, go ahead, please.
Whatever, you have achieved a lot. So from there, the attachment, the emotional bondage with your brand, because my company is hardly a few months old, but I'm so attached. So how could you just let it go and come back to the start? And that's just unbelievable.
Yeah, so, look, I think I had to learn this along the way too. And I'm still attached to the brand. I'm still the single largest individual shareholder of the company. Employees, we have immense connection, customers, channel partners. They're still on WhatsApp with me. So, it's there. It's like, you sending your son or daughter to college at some point. You have to let go. I think, by the way, that's the other thing that all of you will have to learn is to let go. The hardest thing in entrepreneurship, including with your executive staff and your internal employees and people, the place where most entrepreneurs fail is when they don't know how to let go. Because they're very comfortable taking risks for themselves because they're like, yeah, it's okay, it's just a risk. And they're willing to fail themselves, but they just don't know what it means to let others fail. It's really uncomfortable having others fail. So they just don't let go and they keep doing things the way they were doing with 5 people versus when they're 50 versus the 500. You have to learn to let go. And it's a really difficult thing because you're now exposing yourself, you're becoming more vulnerable, and vulnerability requires a lot of courage.
Do you have another book for that?
There's a really good book. It's called Daring Greatly.
Daring Greatly. Okay.
Brene Brown. Again, I'm a big fan of hers. She talks about vulnerability in the boardroom as to how things have changed the last 10, 15 years. The boardrooms used to be about chest thumping people, table thumping people, can never do wrong. How can you expose your weaknesses to? But now, and you should select your board like that. People who embrace vulnerability are the people you want to have in your board.
Thank you.
One last question.
Hello.
It's about the pricing. So since you're coming to a new age business and you're trying to bring in multiple tools together, kind of mixed panel versus flat versus all of them coming to you one solution, how are you going to price your product? What is the thought process?
It's going to be inexpensive. So you're going to save a lot. The more you buy, the more you'll save. Now, I think we're going to have to really think about freemium at scale, because the best 0.1% companies, B2C companies were freemium companies. Facebook doesn't ask you a question ever about how they're going to make money off of you. Now they make money off you for data, which is an indirect way of making money. But B2B has to get comfortable with freemium. We have to really engineer freemium into our cloud architecture, into everything. And we have had to think a lot about how we're going to architect our cloud. We can have 10 million free users. If we can actually go and do that well, PLG is going to be all about that, about freemium models being done right through SEO. And we'll price it well. I think, we also realize that an integrated experience to the same users in a way, because right now, a lot of the tools are not accessible to developers. Honestly, mixed panel, it's like if you buy enough seats, Pendo, Amplitude, all these things. Support tools are only with SREs. So we're like, what does it mean to democratize all this for developers so that they also don't complain all the time about the top-down decisions that come to them, from people higher up who have more access to customer data, more access to customers and things like that. We want to democratize that access for every developer to say, look, I now believe in my product manager, and I believe in my chief product officer, my VP of engineering, my sales engineer, and so on. And if you democratize access to that information to everybody, you'll have less politics in a company.
Hi, Dheeraj.
One last one, yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, sir. One more.
So we'll do it outside, so that just in the interest of everybody's time, yeah.
So hi, my name is Praveen Agarwal. I'm completely a non-IT guy, so pardon me for my ignorance. Just when I sat here, I Googled what is SaaS, and that's when I realized that product what I'm building is actually belongs to SaaS. So that's kind of a karma and magic. Now, point where I'm coming from, I have identified my why in the last 2 years, and that's why I'm coming to this phase. And I'm the fag end of doing my project report. It's almost done. But I'm getting challenged as far as to identify a developer for my product. And also, if somebody is good in that, he's not very good in designing the page and how it looks like. So that's a phase where I am in. If you can just throw some lights. How do I identify a developer for my product?
Yeah, look, this is the watering hole. I believe in watering holes. In a desert, you need to figure out where the watering hole is, where everybody congregates. This is a watering hole. The more you, and you have to shed your inhibitions, learn to get a lot of no's. One thing that entrepreneurs are supposed to be good at is rejection. Many of us didn't date too much to get rejected enough. But I think you need to have a thick skin for hearing a lot of no's. And many a time humility works, because when you get into a thing where you're being non-technical is actually a strength, not just a weakness, because your questions are more English-like, which is what your end users want. It creates more empathy to actually come from a non-tech background. And your questions will never be dumb. People who think you have a dumb question, probably not worth talking to. So hang around with folks out here, learn from your Apple experience, buy an Apple phone if you can, because design will come from that too, actually. That's awesome. You already have that.
He owns a lot of Apple stock.
No, I actually don't. I don't. And even if I did, I wouldn't be able to make a dent in Apple's overall market cap anyway. But thank you so much, folks. We'll come to you outside, sir. Yeah.
So let's do this. Can I take the liberty of suggesting a couple of things?
Yes.
If you can. I'm sure there are a bunch of questions. So we'll try and get them collated. Ship them to you.
And we'll do it in a modern way. We can do it on Discord. We have a really good Discord channel, and Monica can help you bring everybody together on Discord.
Yeah.
Discord is, I mean, my son plays games, so I need to know everything about what is he typing, where is he cussing. I'm like, no, not allowed. But we have a DevRev Discord community. All of you should become part of the circle, and we can talk forever on Discord as well. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you. And some way for you to stay engaged with us at T-Hub.
Yeah, that's Discord right there. So we'd love to do that, and maybe we can figure out how to connect the two Discords. Your Discord and our Discord. Okay, we'll take this outside. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.